Hold on. Great. And I'm now going to admit everyone to the room and go on mute. And Elaine and Sarah, you got the show.
Michelle, you're the one opening, so.
You got it.
And then you'll turn it over to Julie. Thanks so much.
Had a lot of coffee. Get ready. Good morning, everyone. As everyone is joining.
Good morning.
Hi there. I'll say this a few times. I love it that everyone's staying on mute. Please do that.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Dr. J.
It's so nice to see you.
Same. As everyone's joining, if I could ask you a favor to go on in and change or add to your name the institution that you're a trustee or administrator or leader with. That one way when we go to asking questions, I know who you're associated with. That would be awesome. Or if you're like me, you can make up a name. I'm usually Storm. So if you see that come across, that's me. We're also, when we get to the Q&A function team, make sure you know how to raise your hand. I'm sure in Zoom land, we know how to do just about everything. I'm kindly requesting no cat filters today. You can be a pirate if you'd like, if you want, but I see Russell's got the Statue of Liberty. I'm digging that.
I got rid of it, Michelle.
No, I loved it. I think since we just started letting folks in, if it's okay with Elaine and Sarah, we'll let folks have another couple minutes just to join in before I kick us off and really have Representative Husky kick us off. But until then, just going to keep an eye on everyone joining in. Great, thank you guys so much as you're doing that. Again, for the folks that are just joining, if you could make sure in your name, add which institution you're associated with, that would be awesome. I'll give us about another minute. I still see folks connecting. Very cool. I should have music. I usually have music going. Hi, Teresa. Haven't seen you in a bit.
Hi, Michelle. Hope to see you at the Girl Scouts Women of Distinction.
Would not miss it.
Yep. Looking forward to it. Glad it's outside.
Amen to that. All right. All right, Sarah and Elaine, shall I go ahead? Shall we go ahead and get started? We've got such great information to share with everyone today and amazing presenters. So I don't want to lose any of that time. So let me first by welcoming you all to the Colorado Trustee Network's convening on democratizing data and using data to transform student success. I personally wanted to call it Talk Data to Me, but we're going to keep with that title today. And I'll give you a quick run of show of what we're going to be doing. First, my name is Michelle Lucero. My day job is I'm General Counsel and Chief Administrative Officer at Children's Hospital, but that's not why Sarah and Elaine asked me to moderate this. I was blessed enough to serve as a trustee for the Metropolitan State University of Denver for 12 years. And I see my friend Dr. Jordan there. I was chair or co-chair for about 4 of those years, and data was definitely part of our discussions. So thank you all for letting me be part of today. Quickly, our run of show is going to include, we're going to have a opening remarks by the amazing Representative Julie McCluskey. As you all know, she represents Colorado's Central Mountain area. She's a JBC member and a longtime advocate for higher ed. And she's also the sponsor of House Bill 21-1330 and the Workforce Revitalization Bill. After Representative McCluskey, we're going to have a conversation with someone that I already have a girl crush on, Miss Nicole Eiffel. And Nicole is the Senior Program Officer on the United States Program Data Strategy Team for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we are blessed to have her join us. Throughout her career, Nicole has focused on barriers to post-secondary education and issues surrounding persistence and attainment, especially for learners from low-income backgrounds. In her current role, Nicole manages a portfolio focused on scaling national systems, strengthening data infrastructure that connects education and workforce outcomes to improve the availability, quality, and use of data, which are all critical components to helping institutions, policymakers, and consumers make informed decisions about their career paths. So exactly why we are asking her to be part of today. Prior to joining Gates Foundation, Nicole managed several data analyst projects at RTI International, including as analytical director of the from 2012 through 2017, beginning post-secondary students longitudinal study, and as project director of the annual data update of college results online. Folks, if you could mute yourself as you're coming on, please. She and that was what the College of Results Online is an educational trust developed web tool focused on providing detailed institution level data on student graduation rates and labor market outcomes to multiple stakeholders. So welcome, 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 Nicole. And then after Nicole and I have a nice conversation, Mr. Jeff Gold, who's the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Success and Strategic Initiatives with the California State University Chancellor's Office. He's also Jeff's going to give us a presentation of what could be, just an example of a data dashboard that's pretty slick. Jeff is the developer of the Student Success Dashboard, and it's used in the California State University system, the University of Northern Colorado, and recently adopted by Colorado State University. So there is a footprint within the state of Colorado. So with that as our run of show, I would love to turn it over at this point to Representative Julie McCluskey to give us some opening remarks.
Thank you, Michelle. What a privilege it is to be here with all of you this morning. And I want to start just by thanking the trustees that are with us today for your exceptional leadership through such a difficult time in our state's history. I'm also excited to see so many commissioners and other friends of higher education as we launch into this discussion. You know, I've heard it said in numerous circles that there will be a post-pandemic life. And I'm not so sure that's accurate. I think we are coming to realize that there is maybe a promise of an emerging new normal, but all of us that are facing these challenges, whether it's in economic recovery and relief or in the institutions that you all represent in higher education, we are facing incredible pressures, stresses, and times for change. I really want to commend all of you for your leadership and recognize that as we embark on some of these changes, the ability for us to remain nimble and flexible, we have to recognize the importance of students and keeping students at the very center and heart of this work. We brought forward House Bill 1330, recognizing that it was a moment, an opportunity for us to reimagine higher education in this state. And I'm so very excited to think about what a student-centered approach may be for us in higher education, whether we're talking about reducing those equity and opportunity gaps, dealing with workforce revitalization, or thinking about a whole new model, a realignment of our higher ed institutions. No matter what that work may include, we have to ground ourselves in data. Data to be used as the benchmarks and metrics for our success, knowing where we are today, using data as a tool to navigate and guide us as we move forward. I want to tip my hat to President Feinstein from UNC, who first introduced me to the California system. It was a great eye-opening moment, a chance for me to look at how data is being used in other states. So I want to thank him. I want to thank all of you you for being a part of today's discussion, and certainly recognize that this is just the start. As we use data in more powerful ways as a tool to help guide and shape our next steps, I hope that all of you will embrace some of the conversation and learning today, and I look forward to being your partner in the legislature as we move forward. Thanks again, Michelle. Thank you, Sarah and Barrick, for your great leadership on the 1330 task force. And thanks again to all of you for your participation and work in what may be years of change and excitement and new discovery in higher education. Thank you all.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you so much. So let's get started. And what I'd like you to do is, as we're going through this discussion, hold on to your questions. And at the end, we'll be taking some from both Nicole and for Jeff. So, all right, my friend, I'm going to give you a little bit of a softball. Really, okay, the question of the day, why is data so important, right? And how can we use it to truly drive student success?
Thanks, Michelle, and thank you for the invitation. I'm so happy to be here representing something that I love dearly, which is data. And I can talk about it all day, every day. And I will try not to get too wonky for this audience and make sure that we're really trying to connect the technical details around data to really the decision making you all are making on behalf of students and institutions. So happy to go further and deeper in any place, but we're really trying to underscore the fact that we have a bunch of data that is technical that we really need to be able to translate into something that's accessible for a wider audience. In fact, as I was thinking about the title of today's session, I was reflecting on the fact that democratizing data has become such a buzzword, if you will. So I went ahead and Googled it. What are people actually saying or thinking when they hear that term? And one definition that I thought was amusing to come up first was making digital information accessible to the average non-technical user of information systems without having to require the involvement of IT. Right away, there's a lot of technical words in there, but I feel as though this audience and myself, when we think about what's the importance of data in our society, it's really about making relevant information available to multiple stakeholders, whether it's policymakers, trustees like yourselves, and ultimately to allow learners, whether they're students, whether they're the representatives, their parents, adults, those who are going part-time, understand and can make informed decisions about how to ensure that they enter the workforce with a credential of value. And so from that perspective, I really just want to start by saying that we as a foundation view data as a critical enabler of increasing student success. So much so that we now have a dedicated US program data strategy, as Michelle mentioned in my biography. And it's explicitly thinking about how to ensure more Black, Latinx students and those from low-income backgrounds graduate high school and obtain post-secondary credentials of value so that they have knowledge, skills, and abilities to thrive in the workforce. Now that's a lot. That's a lot for us to dig into, but I find that one of the most critical pieces of this is making sure that when we are making policy decisions of major consequence, whether it's establishing funding formulas, whether it's thinking about balancing community college versus four-year institution funding support, how do we think about implementing initiatives? We can only do that if we have a sufficient amount and a completeness of information. Right now, our current data systems are disconnected, they're duplicative. And what that really means in the field is that we're making decisions without all of the information about the students that we seek to serve. One example I'll give is just that the challenge of federal graduation rates. Those are focused on first-time fall and full-time enrolled students, which at a given community college, which I know is only a subset of those represented here, can be less than half of your entering students in a given year. And in fact, as I was looking at the Colorado Department of Higher Ed annual report, I saw that almost 50% of students enrolled in Colorado institutions of higher education are part-time. Now, what does it mean to take a federal reporting requirement and review those graduation rates and thinking about the initiatives or policies you want to change when it doesn't include nearly half of your students. So that's one of the reasons from my perspective that data is so critical to our work, because if we aren't digging deep enough into those nuances, we often are making policy decisions that are not actually going to move the dial in the way that we think, whether it's for attainment rate or other student outcomes.
I'm going to jump in there real quick, Nicole. I think that that last portion of what you said is so critical, and you're absolutely right, especially when you look at the institutions within Colorado. The graduation rates are, anywhere from that 4-year, very few right at the 4-year mark, and quite frankly, many close to that 6-year mark. And given that we've got so many wonderful trustees on this call, can you help me make a connectivity point between the data that we just talked about and the decisions, right, that the trustees and policymakers need to be making, and why that data, again, the criticality of that data?
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and just share a slide that helps us at the foundation think about our theory for how data works here at the foundation. Can everyone see that?
Looks great.
Great. And I'm not going to go through all the details here, but I find that sometimes it's nice to have a visual when talking about technical pieces. And our hypothesis has 4 components within our framework. We really see leveraging data and building it into the way that you make decisions as policymakers as having 4 components. You need to build demand for new information. So a realization that the metrics that you're looking at, whether it's 4- or 6-year graduation rates, you need to understand the details underneath that, especially disaggregated by race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, et cetera. Our hypothesis is that stakeholders like yourselves are asking new questions, different questions, because there is so much information available now. And what we hope to see in the field is a modernization of those data systems that you have, because that can be a challenge, right? You go to an individual institution, or you're thinking along with a practitioner about a new initiative, and you ask, what is the graduation rate for my Pell Grant recipients who are Black or who are Latinx? Well, that information is not available at the federal level. Those sorts of intersectional disaggregates are very difficult to come by. And so making sure that we are tying those questions to improvements in our data systems is critical. But that's not the end of it. We know that more information stored in a system does not guarantee that it is actually going to push us towards better decision making. What we need to ensure is that we're establishing governance principles. Who has access to what data at what level, making sure that the sorts of details that we provide to students and parents are different and more applicable to the decision making and the way that they access information than they would be if we're talking to a policymaker or to yourselves as trustees. And then lastly, we hope that all 3 of those components coming together are what result in increasing data use, which we also think this becomes a circular process, because increased use should generate more demand. We should be asking additional questions. Thank you for this 4-year graduation rate, but where is my information about where those students are in their first year? How do we know that they're on track to that 4-year graduation rate if we don't have additional data elements to really dig into those details?
And Nicole, taking that component of it, and as trustees, and I'm going to say we, sort of the royal we, because I don't think I ever not serve as a trustee. We as trustees and policymakers are making those decisions definitely first and foremost about student performance, but it's also around, what's our staffing, our faculty staffing? Where are we going to be, creating a new program that's going to connect to a workforce need? How do you think about building a framework, and how should the trustees and the policymakers be thinking about building the right framework that has the right data points?
Yes, well, we at the foundation, we love our frameworks, and we actually have one that's related to that I also wanted to share really quickly. And this really touches upon several of the elements that you just described, Michelle. I know there's a lot on this slide, and so we're not going to go into all the details. I really just want attendees today to focus on the 2 dimensions. One way to think about improvements and policy change within higher education is to think about the student pipeline, to think about their journey through that educational experience. First, young adults or high school graduates need to access higher education, which can be measured by a variety of ways. The most primary one at this moment is enrollment. We then need to see them progress. And often when we talk about progression, we think about retention year to year. Did they show up for their second year of post-secondary education? But that's not enough. What we have found from our research is that you actually need to understand whether the student's course taking in that first year is generating college credit. So there has been a lot of information in the field about increasing, or rather, well, decreasing the number of students who start in developmental or remedial education programs, because that actually extends the amount of time it takes them to graduate, or they just give up because they spend so much of their time and their financial resources on courses that actually don't account for part of their major. So we think of progression as a piece of that. We also then think about completion, and completion is a little bit inapt. We think of that as really success. The student may be thinking about transfer to a 4-year. So what does that look like? It also means receiving a credential of value in the field. None of those elements in the student's progression would be sufficient if it wasn't affordable. So cost really needs to be part of the discussion when you're making policy decisions. And lastly, those post-college outcomes. As our opening remarks shared, it is critical for us to be thinking about where students or learners are going and how they are leveraging the skills that they are learning, not just in school, but also in the labor market. And so thinking about prior learning assessment, which is something I've seen Colorado has recently been thinking about, which addresses the fact that especially older college and enrolled adults have additional skills outside of traditional education models that they should have represented in the way that they think about finishing their credential or degree. The other dimension, which I'll go through, is just that we can't only think about performance. Performance is just the number enrolled, the percent who graduated, the average net price. And that's all well and good. We need to be able to have that overarching number. But if we don't know how efficient we're being with our resources and how equitable we are in attaining those outcomes, we are still missing out on a critical component of the student body that we seek to serve. So equity is thinking about post-Pell Grant recipient status, age, race, ethnicity, the intersection of those things. And for efficiency, what we're talking about there is great that you may have a certain number of students graduate or award a certain number of credentials in a year, but how long did it take your students? The time to credential, the number of credits towards earning that credential are equally important when we think about serving students sufficiently.
You know, Nicole, that is, Sarah just made a note that framework, we're going to make the slides available to everyone, because I think that's so important, especially when you look at within, and I don't mean to bring up a sore subject, but the funding within the state can also lead to which of those levers can and cannot be sort of dialed in, right? So as far as, you know, trustees and their role within each of this, is it your thought that they take that framework and see what are the goals of the institution, what do they want to, and then create that framework based, you know, take pieces of that framework, sort of figure out what's the right data points to it? And because that's a lot. I mean, it's a beautiful framework, but it is a lot. Yeah,
that's exactly right. Well, and that's why we try to have those 5 different components of the pipeline. Even if you're selecting just one component within each of those areas to measure and understand for decision making, you're already ahead of the game and able to distinguish all of the various elements that are out there. And in fact, later today, Jeff's presentation is really going to dig into how one particular state system is really elevating certain components that may be of specific value and importance to California state, because not all states have the same sort of coordination. As I mentioned earlier, in looking at Colorado's annual report, the fact that almost half of your students are part-time, that is a critical subgroup to be thinking about, looking at, and also making sure that the goals that you have for those students are aligned with the supports that you have on campus to serve them. We know that full-time is defined by the federal government as 12 credits, but typically you need 15 credits per semester in order to graduate within 2 years for an associate's or 4 years for a bachelor's. With so many part-time students in Colorado, you need to understand and think about what are the strategies for either ensuring that those students have the resources to go full-time, which is not always going to be the case. That gets you into financial aid considerations, childcare considerations, other services on a college campus that actually facilitate the education of those learners. And it's also just small things like when you know that you have a significant portion of students of a certain type, in this case, part-time, you shouldn't be setting up your new student orientation for 9 a.m. They're at work. So just being able to understand what are the significant clusters or cohorts of students within Colorado, and how do we adjust what we may be using as broad implementation or initiatives? How do we adjust those within the context of an individual institution or system to ensure that we're seeing the change in the field that we want? Because having the same approach for everyone, we've seen that doesn't work. It doesn't close the disparities that we see by race, ethnicity, and it's not going to show the return on investment that we hope when we think about that from a funding perspective either.
I love what you just said too, because our institutions within Colorado are so varied, right? And some need to really look at how they direct those support services. And again, as policymakers and trustees, the plan is presented to us from our administrative, from our president, but to understand what that means, right? And to understand that those hours, credit hours mean faculty members, right? So it's really connecting each of those dots there, right? Nicole, I want to ask you a question that came through on the chat. It's from June, and it's the question is asking, have you, and I'm going to add a little words to it, have you seen in your frameworks, are there thoughts about building post-secondary success metrics into K-12 education accountability? Have you seen that in your work over the last years? And then I think you see what it's saying here is using the flexibility provided in one of our Senate bills. Several districts are thinking in that direction. So have you seen that?
Oh my goodness, this is music to my ears. So we have a distinct US program strategy at the Gates Foundation that's focused on pathways. It is explicitly and laser focused on connecting K-12 to post-secondary to the workforce, both from a programmatic perspective. So that could be thinking about dual or concurrent enrollment, another priority that I've seen in some of the materials around Colorado, and ensuring that students that are graduating or they could still be in 11th grade, right? Those late stage high schoolers have enough sufficient information to make an educated decision about what they want to do next. Sometimes that means a 2-year or 4-year degree. Other times that means an apprenticeship, which I also, my heart was swelling when I saw that on your annual report as a priority area. One thing that I think is tricky there that we always want to be thinking about when identifying connections between K-12 and credentials of value or labor market outcomes is ensuring that we're not getting back into bad habits around tracking, right? We want to make sure that we think about pathways as not a euphemism for what we send other students or ensure that they do. Often we hear folks say, well, not everybody needs a college degree, et cetera, et cetera. Well, first off, BLS projections would beg to differ on that in terms of what is it now? Probably at least 60%. And I know it may be even higher than that in Colorado that requires some sort of post-secondary credential. I think the important thing to differentiate there is that can be a combination of workforce training, connections to your Department of Labor, WIOA funded training out of federal funding that can be leveraged for those sorts of educational opportunities. And one of the things that our pathway strategy is thinking about is how do we actually connect some of those other pathways back into a traditional 2 or 4-year credential earned degree. So when we are fast and loose with our language and think about these pathways as distinct, and in fact, can sometimes use them as coded language for a certain type of student, we really need to come back to what are we centering our equity and our equitable student success on. And that should be on ensuring that all of those pathways generate credentials of value and upward mobility in the labor market. And so making sure that you're breaking down those silos, that you're incorporating dual enrollment and concurrent enrollment as came up, and other areas of preparation for students in K-12 so that they know the different paths available to them is absolutely critical.
Wonderful. I know we could keep, and there's going to be time for questions at the end. And but I think this was a beautiful segue to Jeff. And so the folks who have questions, please hold on to them. Either hold your hand up, and between Elaine, Sarah, and I, we're going to keep an eye, or put it in the chat itself. But I'm now going to transition over to the amazing Jeff, who's going to give us a sample, right? We're not saying this is the end all be all. Sorry, Jeff, it's pretty slick. I love it. But this is a great sample of what could be. And so, Jeff, with that, can you give us a version of what is possible?
Sure. Thank you for that. And amazing. That's a tough bill to fill. So I hope I will. Great to see everyone. Thank you for having me. And before I start, just a quick disclaimer, which is I have way too much information and way too little time. I think I have 10 minutes. So I'm going to go quickly, but I thought there's nothing better than for you to be able to see at least how one state addressed some of the issues, or we're trying to address some of the issues that I thought Representative McCluskey really eloquently presented in the beginning, which is one of the benefits that we all have is that we have teams of people on our campuses that want to do the right thing. And it's incumbent upon us to democratize the data, or in other words, get the data in front of folks in ways that are actionable. So I'm going to share right now my screen, which is the homepage of our dashboard and our efforts to get these data in front of our 50,000 faculty, staff, and administrators in the California State University system. Lots of information here, all organized around strategic questions. I'm going to focus on two questions that we presented to our constituents. First is the question around equity. We have a whole dashboard on the equity gap right here. And questions like, what does the gap look like? How do I talk about the gap, and how do I make it actionable? What early academic behaviors, if I want to close the gap, what happens in the first 2 years matters, but it matters differentially on different campuses for different students. And so we have a bunch of models here. I'm going to focus on this very first one, which is just fundamental to understanding what the gap is and how to act on it. So what we're looking at here, just to orient you, we have for every one of our campuses, but I'm looking at the system. We're looking at freshman students who came to us 6 years ago. We're looking at 6-year graduation rates for first generation students. We could look for other populations as well. But the idea here is to look at that gap, or that differential in outcomes in graduation rates, in this case between first generation students and non-first generation. This historical chart shows us that in purple, our first generation students are consistently less likely to graduate by a tune of about 10 to 15 points over the last 5 years. Now, many of our campus constituents know that. They know that our underserved students are not graduating at similar rates, but how they really conceptualize that and make that actionable for them is the purpose of this chart. And so on the right, what we've done is personified these data by having each one of these grad cap represent 10 students. And what this chart on the right is telling us is that if we as a CSU system had graduate 2,820 more first generation freshmen from students who came to us 6 years ago in 2014, we would be celebrating that we have no gap, that you're just as likely to graduate if you're a first generation student or not. And so what's beautiful about this is a couple things. First of all, it lets you put a number. We have 500,000 students. So when we talk to campuses about graduating an additional 3,000 or so first gen students, students of color, low income students, everyone can get on board with that, number one. And now we have something to talk about. Secondly, we can make it even more actionable when I look at the majors that they came from, or the disciplines they came from. So we're taking those 2,800 students and we see the largest share come from those who came to us with an undeclared major. That again allows us, perhaps you as trustees, our system office, our presidents, it allows them to start asking questions about students who come to us with undeclared majors. How do we support them better? Can we do meta majors? Can we get them in a sense of belonging within a major quickly? Because we see that while being undeclared puts you at a disadvantage for graduating for all students, it's disproportionately negative for students who need the most support. And so just to show you again the power of a system, we have all of our campuses. So here's Bakersfield. Bakersfield, when we talk to their campus, we say, do you think you could graduate in the 6-year time period an additional 44 first-generation students? Because if you did, you as a campus would have no gap. And they can also see that their number 44 leads into our number, the 2,800, and everyone feels part of this same collective goal. They understand what they have to do. And again, when they look at their top majors, they're different. Here's 8 biology students, 7 computer engineering students. So this again allows for a very granular conversation. The department chair in biology on that campus can talk with the faculty meeting after meeting, day after day, and start to track. How are first generation students doing in the biology major? Where are they tripping up? What can we collectively do to better support their success? So again, one question is, how do we visualize the equity gap that's so important to us? And then how do we make it personal so that we, no matter where we are in the institution, can act on it? That's one question. The second question, and again, our dashboard is filled with questions. We have about 35 of them. I'm going to show you just one more. We have this faculty dashboard, which asks a series of questions at the program, department, and major level. So again, taking this equity gap and the student success down to through the arteries of the campus to the point where it's most meaningful to our practitioners. And you can see there are a lot of questions we're asking with data. What I'm going to show you now is this chart that talks about how quickly do students progress towards their degree. And so let's assume for a minute that we're all professors at Fullerton, one of our largest campuses. So you can see I selected Fullerton. We could choose any campus, any college, any major that we have. I'm choosing Fullerton, I'm choosing their College of Natural Sciences, I'm choosing biology. So again, we're all biology faculty for the purpose of this presentation. And I could go and look at any year over the last 15 years of data. But what we want to look at is this time series chart of what happened to students. And so the question here is, how quickly do our students progress towards a degree? If some of us teach that early lower division biology class, we may not know much about what happens to our students either before they come to us or after. We don't even know if they graduate. If we teach later on, maybe we're teaching an upper division botany course, let's say, we have no idea whether the students who came to us were biology majors. We don't know anything about them other than they're with us at the end. But we have to be honest, if we want to improve student success, we need to know a lot more about our students to be able to serve them well. So what this chart allows you to do with the click of one button is really get a sense of that academic trajectory. So to walk you through, this x-axis here is the last 6 years of time. So starting with 2014 to 2020, our last set of graduation rate data. We're going to update this in the next month or two. And the y-axis here is the number of units that these students accumulated over the last 6 years. Last thing I want you to know, and this is where it gets a little confusing for early in the morning. It's a little earlier for me, I know. Is the sense of color here. If the student's icon is black, it means that they're enrolled, they're still enrolled. If they turn red, it means that they drop out at that point. If they turn green, that means they graduate. And if they turn yellow, it means that we count them as a dropout from our records for the official IPEDS records. But there's actually a positive story there that they went ahead and graduated within 6 years from another institution. So I'm going to hit play. We have 213 students. Again, imagine we're in a department meeting, we're at Fullerton, and we're trying to really understand student success so that we could take a more active role as biology professors. So when I hit play, we're going to see what happened to those 213 students over the last 6 years. So we see in this first year, a lot of dropouts in the red, some yellows went to another university. Here's 1 3-year graduate, 4-year graduates, 5-year graduates, and 6. And so what this allows you to do year over year, again, as a faculty member, is see these patterns and identify with your students as individuals and understand where you can help. So let me just put on my faculty hat for a minute and say, if I'm the department chair and I'm having a conversation, I'm going to start to look at what's happening in these first 2 years. In fact, there's a summary here of what the data are telling us. We see that almost half, or 24 of the students who left the major altogether and left the university, that happened in the first year. So again, you see a fairly normal pattern. You see a lot of positives here with the 4-, 5-, and 6-year graduates, but I would focus on what's going on with these students here and what do we know about them. And I can see that not only are they leaving in their first year, when I roll over the students, I'm not getting personal information, But I am seeing that a lot of them are leaving after the first term. They don't even have a 15 units, some of them. And a lot of the students who are leaving are going to other universities. Here's a student who went to a private university, West Coast University. Why would you want to come to the California State University, pay our lower fees, a wonderful education, and then leave and spend 3, 4, or 5 times as much? There's a reason that we need to find out. So we can really start to have conversations about what we're seeing. And then we get to the point of asking ourselves, are these students leaving in good academic standing? What courses are tripping them up? Is it a sense of belonging? What do we know about our curriculum and the curricular pathways? And what's in our power to help these students? Perhaps they need more support outside the classroom in terms of supplemental instruction or tutoring, or perhaps it's our pedagogy. Perhaps we're not being inclusive enough. Perhaps we're teaching like it was the 1960s with a sink or swim mentality. So these are the conversations that really allow us to be honest with our data and really focus on student success at the granular level, again, through the arteries of the campus, so that everyone, no matter where you sit on campus, can be bought into both the student success and equity mission that we have. The last thing I'll show, because I see that I just have a minute, is we have an equity summary for every major, every group of students. So we're seeing here that our first generation students graduated in this group. Let me actually go back so you can see the whole thing. But our first generation students graduated at a rate of 65% in 6 years, where non-first gen graduated at a rate of 79%. So again, the overall graduation rate for biology at Fullerton is really terrific. I forgot what it was exactly, maybe 72, 73, whatever it was. That, they could always get better, but that's pretty good. But when we start to look at gaps, and we can look at gaps at gender, this gives us very actionable areas for the faculty who I can guarantee you never knew this and are interested in this to become actionable. And the last thing is, again, we want to individualize this. This isn't just about percentage points. These are people's lives. And so when we're talking about a 14 percentage point gap in first gen and non-first gen graduation rates for Fullerton's biology students, we're talking about 16 students. And this is a big major, as you can see at Fullerton. I can guarantee you, if I were not with the Colorado folks today, but I were with the Fullerton biology folks, and I looked them in the eye and said, faculty, do we think we could work harder to graduate an additional 16 first gen students? I can guarantee the answer would be enthusiastic yes. So in conclusion, we have a lot more behind the scenes here, but I think at least in one state, in our state, this is an example of how we've taken data that traditionally has been set for compliance purposes, reflected it back to the people that make the most difference, our faculty, our staff, and administrators, and challenged them to do better for our students by understanding our student realities.
Oh my goodness, Jeff, this is so, I mean, I can just see people like kind of jumping, wanting to ask questions. So let me ask a couple before we get there. And I'm going to tie off of what you just said, right? I think when you see that path and you see those numbers, and now you can actually see them. And there's even something to the visual piece of seeing a little person, right? Versus names on a, how have you created that culture within the system that doesn't allow for a gotcha, right? It doesn't allow for we're going to use this information to hit you over the head, but rather we're going to use this and have a culture of continuous improvement and how can we make it better? So how have you done that, or are you in the process of doing that?
Yeah, I think it's a continual process. And I think a big part of that is trust. But if I can speak plainly, I have to say that if we're all truly serious about improving student success and fostering equity, it really has to start with knowing our students. And a big part of that is leveraging data to identify systemic barriers to their success and figuring out how to use these insights to serve students better. So I think that's at the heart of it. I think it does take trust. We have set, another thing is that we in the CSU have a strategic initiative called the Graduation Initiative, where our system office took a fairly top-down approach to setting reasonable benchmarks. Nicole mentioned the College Results Online. We use College Results Online to find peers for each one of our campuses to set goals for equity and graduation rates. And so, but even though that was top-down, we then stepped aside and said, now you tell us how you're going to get there. Give us your plans about how you're going to close your gaps. Give us your plans about how you're going to be more intentional about student success and you're going to meet these ambitious goals. And then we hold them accountable, but we don't hold them accountable in a punitive way. We hold them accountable when we see things aren't working together with the data. We partner together to figure out how we're going to change course and support them in making those changes.
Wonderful. I have one more question, Jeff, and then we'll open it up to this. And I don't think you mentioned this, but this dashboard is not set for public viewing, right? It's set for really internal stakeholders. So can you take us through the thought process to keep it, I'm going to call it not public, but to keep the view kind of restricted, and the pros and cons to that?
Yeah, I'll tell you, since there's really not very many California people here, if I had my vote, it would be public. You know, we're a public institution. We work for the state of California. These are the people's data. That said, I really understand and respect why it's private. You know, when you are trying to undertake a performance improvement plan like we are, when you're really trying to tackle equity head on, the last thing you'd like to see as a president or a faculty member is a headline about how much worse you're doing than another sister CSU campus. How, we need to be able to share data without worry, without fear that it's going to be used punitively, either within the press or within the state government or internally. And I think we can control the internal part. Our chancellor has been terrific about using the data as a flashlight and not as a hammer, if you will. We're here together with the same mission. But you know, I do completely understand the risks of making it public versus private. The other thing I'll say is that we have created several dashboards for our high school partners, our community college partners. We even have a dashboard for faith-based institutions in California, where we custom feed them data about students in their area from their demographics that are coming to the CSU and what their outcomes are. The idea is student success is not one person's job, it's all of our jobs. And we have, I'm sure in Colorado, it's the same thing. You have alumni, you have members of the community, you have members of the state coming to you all the time saying, how can I help? And using data in this way can really point a way for them to help in concrete ways.
Wonderful. All right, team, I'm going to open us up to Q&A. And to start off, President Feinstein, let me call on you, sir.
Thanks. That was a wonderful presentation, Jeff, and thank you so much, also Nicole, for being here. You know, I would love to see a time in which Colorado had this level of data analytics that we could actually use to dig into some of the ways in which we can improve student success, not just for an individual campus, but for a state. And hopefully all of you saw today the possibilities of leveraging data analytics and also the visualization pieces of this that really make it come to life on the screen. I think you stated that quite eloquently, Michelle. I mean, it's those little icons are individuals or people, and you can actually dig into their stories in ways I think that would be very beneficial, not only to the individual campus, but for Colorado at large. You know, Jeff, you were talking about data sharing a little bit. What has it been like for 23 university presidents to get comfortable with sharing data at that level? I mean, how has that kind of competitive mindset played out if people can see graduation retention rates or how well a biology program is doing at one campus versus another? Has there been conflict, or have there been ways in which you've been able to address ensuring that people are all working in the same direction, which is focusing on student success in California?
Yeah, Andy, great question. And I'll tell you that the credit for the culture of improvement really lies with our chancellor. So in our system, we have a chancellor, and the 23 presidents report into the chancellor. And the chancellor set the tone that we will not have a culture of punishment. This is a culture of continuous improvement. And he has committed, we present data at every one of his cabinet meetings with his presidents, and they see each other's data. So it's not just a one-off, it's not a hypothetical. Yes, you could view other people's data, but in practice, on the agenda, even with COVID, even with so many issues, we make time at the highest level to have conversations, not just about our own data. In other words, not just about University of Northern Colorado's data, but sitting next to the president, talking about data across the system. We think it's important with 23 campuses, for every president to know which one of our campuses is doing the best job of graduating Latinx students, which one of our campuses is really struggling with African-American male students. And by the way, the other side is which one of our campuses has some programs and some strategies that have really worked. And I think that, because of the culture that we have started to develop, and because so far we have not used the data as a hammer, I think there is a feeling of trust. And I think that, it takes a while to build, but for my lens, it was the chancellor making it clear that this was a priority, not only in name, but by including it on every agenda with the president's.
Thank you, Jeff. As I'm calling on Teresa next, I'm going to add to, because I know what her question is going to be, but Teresa, please ask it. And I'd love for Nicole and Jeff to also talk about, when we talk about what data, of really talking a bit about keeping ourselves from allowing perfect to be the enemy of good, right? When we're trying to gather all the data. So Teresa, I think that's part of your question at the end, but let me kick it over to you, my friend.
Hi, yes, I'm a Western Colorado University trustee, and this is really exciting and valuable to see what you've done here. And so, the state of Colorado governor has a dashboard with data that tracks really important things. So we know it can be done and valuable. But how do you make sure that you have the proper data? And how do, what kind of IT systems and budgets are needed, to allow this kind of analysis and dashboard?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and start, and Nicole, if you wanted to jump in as well. I'll say that I appreciate the accolades. It's a fancy dashboard. I've worked on it a while, but you don't need a fancy dashboard. You need some basic data. You would be surprised as trustees, and it would be disheartening, I hate to say, if you were to walk on your campuses and stop 2 or 3 faculty members, stop a couple administrators randomly and ask them some really basic questions. Like I just said, how are Latinx students faring in this major or overall, or which of your programs have the most differential impact on student success for your first generations? We can go on and on with what the questions might be. I can almost guarantee, and it's not you, it's us too, it's across the nation, that people would not be able to answer those most basic questions. So sometimes what I should have, part of my disclaimer should have been, maybe don't be so wowed. What we've developed, I'm very proud of, but at the end of the day, with a simple spreadsheet and some simple, reliable data, you can start to have conversations that can catapult your student success efforts without fancy dashboards, without fancy predictive modeling. I think the one thing that I meant to mention earlier that I think is so important, we all have a huge advantage. We have faculty, staff, and administrators across Colorado, across California that have chosen to work for us, often for less pay, sometimes for less respect, sometimes they're at a disadvantage because they truly believe in our mission. They want equity for our students. They want our students to succeed. They buy into the transformative power of a Colorado or a California degree. It's incumbent upon us to give them data so that, even if it's not perfect data, give them what we can in whatever format we can to lead them to meaningful change in their practice.
Yeah, from the systems perspective, one thing I'll mention, so we also support another platform out there by the National Student Clearinghouse. It's called the Post-Secondary Data Partnership, also has visualizations like Jeff described, and includes benchmarking between institutions and those within or without their state. The thing that we found really interesting is that it does take some time to submit data if you want it to look beautiful in a visualization. And what we found actually is that by virtue of states or institutions and actually state systems, Colorado community colleges have been looking into PDP, there starts to be a change in the culture on a campus on how you discuss those decisions, right? So instead of just IR thinking about compliance and accountability, these are the requirements for federal reporting and let's move forward. It opens up a conversation, especially around gateway course completion, thinking about what are the courses on our campus that students are taking that don't result in college credit, and how is that decided? So it requires actually bringing in not just your IR officials or your registrar's office, but advising the academic advisors themselves. And that process of just even submitting the data before you even get to the results has opened up this realization from the siloed departments within an institution that, hey, we need our systems to talk to one another. That's important. We also together need to talk to one another about how we're making these decisions because of the impact that they have on the way the data looks later on. So that's one of the things we've seen. I am a major proponent of more investment in IT systems and structures. Many of them are duct taped together and have different standards, and that's extremely challenging. And happy to take offline more details around our interoperability approach and how to harmonize different standards across institutions.
Great. Thank you, Jeff and Nicole and Teresa for the question. And the other point that I would place on that is for all the right reasons, we start and always talk about student success, but as trustees, this kind of data can also, I'll use the words of Jeff, catapult your ability to govern the institution that you are over. So it's so key there. I think we might have time for 2 questions. I'll start with Jen Walmer, and then Dr. Jordan, you may have the last question before we end our time. But Jen, over to you.
Thanks so much for the conversation today. It's been really helpful. Jeff, it's an incredibly powerful example of what data can do. One of the things that I'm really struggling with, though, a little bit is when Nicole talked and when we launched this whole conversation, we really talked about it from a student-centered approach. And I guess the thing that I'm really struggling with is I understand that the role that this data plays, obviously, for institutions and professors doing the work. I'm struggling with the fact that it isn't that same trust about a student's ability to navigate the system that is going to be most successful for them. The lack of transparency, I'm struggling. So wondering, Nicole, if there are other places, you mentioned other data sources that you've seen in other places, understanding California is not making it public. Are there other places that are trusting students to use that as a navigation tool, the system that best meets their needs?
Well, yes. I think one of the major challenges that we've seen in the field is that there are a lot of tools out there for students, or quote unquote for students, but they're not actually designed with the student hand in hand to understand how they even navigate that information. A critical example would be the Federal College Scorecard, which has been a major game changer in just the way we even talk about expectations of higher ed. But when you dig into the Google Analytics behind it of who's actually using the tool, it's basically, 80% researchers and 20% folks that are deciding between, one Ivy and another. And so how do we actually pivot the way that it's both designed and how we talk about the narrative around the information so that students have what they need? So from the foundation's perspective, what we think about is actually both narrative change and occupational identity within our pathways work. So that's actually about, for better or worse, making some of these tools available to high school advisors that are thinking about college going for their students, and coaching and describing and building up their capacity to discuss with the student the options available to them. There have been over time, another successful project that I'd seen in the past, but of course all of these things require funding, is actually out of California, where they were mapping essentially the A through G requirements, which guarantee enrollment into Cal State. And they were actually creating reports. One would go to the counselor, one would go to the parent, and one would go to the student, and would have slightly different design elements for the student to know at the beginning of their junior year, hey, if you only take one more foreign language or math course, you could very easily end up at a CSU in 2 years. And so I do think that there is a gap in the field in how much we actually connect this information down to the learner. And so we're doing some work there around equity principles and designing these sorts of platforms. There's a huge amount of work going on in what's called learning and employment records, which are really, you may hear about them as digital wallets, thinking about how a student can take everything they've learned, whether it's in the workforce or in school, and bring that and own it with them forward, as opposed to it being the ownership of a particular institution or state. So not a lot of great answers, but there are some bright spots in the field. Student achievement measures by APLU, that's another platform. The PDP I mentioned earlier has a public facing tool coming out later this year. And there's a few others, but they do, in the absence of coordinated discussions with advisors, we find that learners don't navigate them as well as we'd hope for making those better choices.
And let me just jump in quickly, Jen. I didn't mean to say that we don't address the community needs. So this tool goes really deep. We don't think that students would find value in a lot of the depth of analysis. but I'll put in the chat now, we have a series of public dashboards that take just the high level information that our so high school students who come to us, students who are enrolled, and put that information to empower them in more digestible ways. There's just one example I put in the chat for you.
Thank you, Jeff, Nicole, and Jen. Dr. Jordan.
You are on mute, sir.
I think he's trying to get off mute. Elaine or Sarah, can you unmute him?
There we are.
There we
Nope.
go.
Does that work?
We got you.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Michelle. So first of all, both to Jeff and Nicole, thank you so much for your presentations today. So since this is largely, although not exclusively, a group of trustees, I'd be really interested in hearing from both of you, Jeff, in your specific case, the Cal State trustees, how they use this data in interacting with the chancellor and the presidents and the students and faculty. And Nicole, I'd be interested in hearing from the foundation's perspective, what you think the appropriate role of trustees would be in the use of this data in interacting with their administrations and their faculty and students.
Sure, Nicole, I'll just jump in quickly. We're very intentional about leading our trustees to the data that's most important for their role. And that really is not the data I showed today. They have access to it, they can see it, that's wonderful. But there was a whole series of visualizations I did not show today that are about our graduation initiative. And what they show are predictive models about how each campus is moving towards their 2025 goals, and also different analyses on equity gaps on our campus. And so our trustees are really focused at the higher level when they see a campus isn't moving much on their equity gaps for student of color over a year or two. They have conversations with the presidents and with the chancellor about that, but they really do not go into the department level or some of the other dashboard, and they can see the data, but that's their focus primarily.
From my perspective, I think the primary question that trustees should be asking is who's missing? When we see progress, who is not represented that we as a mission are responsible for ensuring have a successful journey through higher education. So I think that when you're in those conversations with administrators and leaders on a college campus, looking at the information that they're using to tie to their strategic plan. So what exactly is the key performance indicator that's tied to each of those components? And I've seen in the annual report, that's certainly something that's happening at the higher levels. And then asking that next question of why do we think that this is the most critical one for our context in Colorado? Because I want to go back to the idea that sometimes we're pulling from national research that is very understandable, but if it doesn't fit the priority context within the state, again, with that disproportionately higher number of part-time students, you're not actually going to see the sorts of changes that you want. So really, I think it's, okay, if these are your outcomes, what are the key performance indicators related to the data that we see that we should be tracking and understanding? How is that disaggregated by critical subgroups and demographics of students? And then who's missing? Who are we not addressing through either the initiative as designed or by the key performance indicator as measured?
What a brilliant way to end this session, everyone. I want to, before I turn it over to the amazing Elaine Berman, I want to thank you all for joining us. Nicole and Jeff, you're phenomenal. Thank you all for the questions. Elaine, it's all yours.
Well, I'll tell you, we weren't sure whether this was going to attract a lot of people and whether people were going to find data sexy and interesting, but I would say the vast majority of you stayed on the call for the entire time, which says a lot to our speakers and to our moderator. So Nicole and Jeff, thank you so very much. Nicole, I want to give a shout out to Jill Hawley because she's the one who brought you here today. And Jeff, I want to give a shout out to Andy Feinstein because it was because of him that you're here today. And we hope that you'll continue to work with people in Colorado. We need your expertise and your experience. This is has been recorded. It's going to be posted on the CTN website. We're going to try to get this. We will get the slides to you so we can share them. I think this has great possibilities for the 1330 task force. and some possible recommendations that could come out of it. So Representative McCloskey, I hope you're pleased with the conversation that we had today. Michelle, you did an amazing job moderating. You had great experience as an MSU trustee. And with that, we will continue to provide learning opportunities for trustees in the future. So you'll expect to hear from us soon. Thank you all very, very much.